Welcome back to Light the Camera Author, the show where books meet culture, history meets storytelling, and authors pull back the curtain on the stories behind their stories. And I'm the host, Jim Juno. And today's conversation sits right at the crossroads of sports, politics, race, and the American identity. My guest today is award-winning journalist and author Howard Bryant, and he's here to talk about his powerful new book, Kings and Pawns: Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. This is coming out on January 20th, according to Amazon. And Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson are two names that we think we know. Paul Robeson, the star of Showboat and The Emperor Jones, as well as several other motion pictures. Also, a singer, the great baritone singer, Jackie Robinson, breaking the color line of baseball in 1947. But this book reveals a far more complicated and far more unsettling story about fame, loyalty, protest, and what America demands from its black heroes. Howard, welcome to Light the Camera Author.
Jim, thanks for having me.
Now let's start at the beginning. Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson. In the early 20th century, Paul Robeson was the hottest African American actor around. I mean, he had several movies and he was All American at Rutgers in football. And there was Jackie Robinson, I think a four-letter winner, a four-sport letter winner at UCLA.
hmm
Also, world famous for breaking the dreaded color line in baseball. But they're usually treated as separate historical figures. But your book starts by telling people that they're actually side by side, aren't they?
Yes, and that they're part of a lineage. I mean, I think that the great thing about being able to do what we get to do for a living is you get to uncover things, the things you think you know, the things that you don't know, and you really do get a chance to talk about things at a level of depth that you probably wouldn't normally. That's what we do as authors. You take the time to sort of uncover stories that people think that they've heard before. And in Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson's case, here are these two incredible figures whose paths have never crossed. They sort of live in these two separate universes, which is why in the book I wanted to sort of give them alternating chapters because they really had never met one another until this fateful day in 1949, where Jackie is placed in opposition to Paul Robeson to testify against Robeson in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee because of Robeson's alleged communist ties. So the real story that I just loved, really digging into was how did these two American heroes, these two American giants, be placed in opposition to one another when they'd never met? And
Right.
and when neither one had any animosity toward the other, what were the forces, what were the gravitational pulls that pulled them together?
And speaking of the gravitational pull, let's educate some people here real quick. In April 1949, Paul Robeson was in Paris for the Paris Peace Conference, and he wasn't there to give a speech. He wasn't there to be political in any way. He sang a song, and also as he is as he's wont to do, he made some few off the cuff remarks. Basically, it says that Americans are determined to fight for peace. We do not wish to fight the Soviet Union. That was it. We're resolved. We don't want to get into another war. And somehow the Associated Press overnight took those comments to and quoted Robeson as saying, "It's unthinkable that the American Negroes would go to war on behalf of those who have oppressed us against the Soviet Union, which in one generation has lifted our people to full human dignity." How in the world did the Associated Press get that from what he actually said?
Yeah. Well, the interesting part is that it doesn't really matter. What matters is
True.
what
And
matters
you're right, because
that
he's an American citizen, he's entitled to his opinion.
well, and also once that quote went across the wire, it forever changed Paul Robeson's life. Whether he said it, whether he didn't say it, I am inclined that he never said it. And the idea that it is unthinkable that American eagles would fight against the Soviet Union. I mean, it sounds like propaganda in its own way. And it set a course in motion that changed Paul Robeson's life.
Well,
And
it ruined his
what
career.
it changed everything. It changed his career. It changed Jackie Robinson's career. It changed how everyone, thought about Robeson. Now, Robeson in 1949 was already in a great deal of controversy because of the mood of the country. The country was moving completely against any sort of any semblance that the United States and the Soviet Union were still World War II allies was gone by 1949. But what this did was it took some of the political apparatus in the United States to focus in on Robeson in a way that they hadn't really focused in on him because his career had already really been, had been seriously damaged. But what was the response? The response was from government and from some other, very influential forces, newspapers, etc., is that you have this gigantic black figure who is well known across all the disciplines, as you mentioned: sports, politics, race, music, theater. And now we need to find another voice to counter his political voice. So, who is going to be the voice of reason? Who's going to be the counter? And believe me, this was an orchestrated campaign, even
Oh,
in
yes.
even in the newspapers, saying, "Okay, now that Paul Robeson has made it clear that he believes that black people wouldn't fight on behalf of the United States, who's going to counter that argument?" And that is how these two people who never met each other, who had nothing but admiration for each other as athletes and as Americans, were placed in opposition to each other in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee.
And again, for those of you who are ignorant of the House American Un-American Activity Committee, the HUAC, this was a really a bad people. These are really bad people. I want, for want of a better term. Um, they really ruined people's lives
Yes.
for no other reason. They want to know how you voted. They want to know if you were a member of the Communist Party. It's none of their daggone business. I mean, it's illegal
Well, back
questions.
then it was illegal. I mean, you
Yeah.
have to remember it wasn't just HUAC. It was in it was its momentum, the momentum of the country post World War II. And I don't know how old you are, but I'm sure we're somewhere in close range to each other. And, we all grew up with the Cold War. We grew up. I mean, why
Mhm.
are the Olympics important? Because of the Cold War, because of the USA versus Russia. I mean, I remember this as, when I was a kid. And why did we care about any of it? It was us versus them. Rocky Four, us versus
Yeah.
them. And so this is the entire mood of the country in 1949. And while they're passing laws in 1946, 1947, it is illegal to be a member of the Communist Party. It is illegal to associate. That just like we have these loyalty oaths today that have been revived, back then, if you were going to work for the federal government, you had to sign an oath of loyalty that you were not a member of the Communist Party. So I think one of the things that I really was trying to get across in this book was to let people know just how severe the accusation was. If you called someone a communist in 1947, 48, 49, all the way up until the early 60s, your entire career was in danger. Your life
Mhm.
was in danger. Your standing, your ability to feed your family. One of the great books on this was A Great American Family by David Marinus.
Yeah.
Um, what happened to his family. This is a this is a defining, disqualifying insult.
Oh, it is. I mean, your career was over. I mean, it happened. It happened to people, well-known actors.
Well, of
Uh,
course. And then you look at
co-
the Hollywood 10, anyone who's, for the pop culture people out there, if you'd seen the movie Trumbo, the same
yeah.
thing. And Oppenheimer and Albert Einstein, all of the really, really huge figures out there who had been accused of being anti-American. And you listen to the rhetoric, and the rhetoric is very similar to the rhetoric that we have today. The enemy within, enemy of the
Mhm.
people. All of these things have been recycled to create that same hysteria and that same isolation and division.
I mean, just today you had people from the president's people saying things about Hispanic people,
That's
and
right. Mm-hmm.
I mean it's like you said, it's recycled every
That's
20
right.
years it seems.
So what happens to Robeson? now that he is placed in this opposition to Robinson, so Robinson is now asked by Dodger owner Branch Rickey to testify on behalf of the loyalty of the Black American race. That this is so now we have hearings attesting to the loyalty of Black Americans, and Jackie Robinson is the star witness, they're all going to testify against Robeson. And this is not something that Jackie Robinson wanted to do. Mm-mm. But he also felt an enormous amount of loyalty and responsibility to Branch Rickey. Branch Rickey changed history. He and Rickey together changed history. He brought Robinson into the major leagues. He created for him a pathway that was not only for Jackie, but for other Black players. The game hadn't had a Black player since 1884.
Yes.
And as Robinson had said, he had so much faith in Branch Rickey. If Branch Rickey had told him to jump off a bridge, he would have. And he had that much faith in Rickey, and Jackie also was a veteran. He was a member of the Army in the early 40s, and so felt a real responsibility, and also felt like in a time of burgeoning civil rights, anything that made African Americans look less American was going to hurt the cause of civil rights. He felt he had to do this.
And the real ironic part is that African Americans traditionally, whenever there was a war, they sign up, they serve honorably. You look all the way back to World War I.
That's right.
And go back to the Revolutionary War. I mean, Crispus Attucks was like the very first person killed, and he was African American.
Yes.
So, I mean, but it feels like the same question keeps coming back to us. It's like, who gets to protest, and what is the cost of the protest?
That's right. That's right. We're in the same situation, it really does recycle itself in so many ways. And it really does, what is past is prologue. It really does feel like we are going backwards into this time. And that's one of the reasons why this book was so important to me, is that the parallels were just so obvious. And also, we talk so much about cancel culture, and you have all of these famous people talking about all that they're losing. Paul Robeson was actually canceled. Paul Robeson lost his entire career.
Yes, he did. He went from making what I believe like $100,000 a year to $3,000.
$2,000 a year. And Robeson, in addition to that, was the federal government denied him a passport. He couldn't even go overseas to make money. They put him under house arrest essentially for 8 years for his politics. And so when we're talking about what is happening today and, how far can governments go? I mean, this was found unconstitutional in 1958, but between 1950 and 1958, Paul Robeson was not allowed to leave the United States. He wasn't allowed to go to Canada. He wasn't allowed to go to Hawaii. He was not allowed to go. He was confined to the contiguous 48.
And then when he did try to have a concert, and for those of you who are not familiar with the Peekskill concert, this happened, I believe, in late 1949.
September of 49.
September of 49. First off, racist people came out. It was in Peekskill, New York. And not only did people who thought they were like true Americans come out, they also all the racists. It was like Charlottesville times 10.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they were throwing stones the size of softballs from what I was seeing.
Oh yeah, they were dragging people out of their cars while the police watched.
Or took part.
It was a message. It was a message that, once again, I mean, does it sound familiar? We're going to take our country back. Mm-hmm. This was specifically the mood. And this is one of the areas of the book that I always found kind of fascinating, because it is not true. The narrative that we said that Jackie Robinson ruined Paul Robeson's career is not true. In the sense that Paul Robeson was already, by 1946, Paul Robeson was already having his concerts canceled, and the American, the VFW and a lot of right-wing forces and a lot of America First protesters were coming after him. What the Robinson testimony did do to Paul Robeson, though, was that it created a lane for violence, for more violence toward Robeson. Because of Jackie Robinson's stature, because of his name and where he was. He's going to win the MVP that year. He's the most famous, inspirational Black person in the country because of integrating the game with the Dodgers. The amount of freedom that some of these right-wing forces felt they had to attack Robeson increased tenfold. The amount of people in government who felt like they could continue to really institute, legislation against anything that was remotely considered progressive or left-wing or socialist or communist, because you had Jackie Robinson up there talking about it as well. So it was a significant moment for both Robinson, but also for Robeson, who was already on the decline. So on the one hand, it wasn't Jackie that did it, but it was Jackie's testimony that fueled even more the fire against Paul Robeson.
I know Jackie Robinson later in life regretted that. Now, did he ever make peace with Robeson face to face?
No, never did. The two never met. And I think that the piece of this that I think really hit home for me was Jackie Robinson was considered in 1949 an American hero for what he had done. But what did he do? Yeah. He had essentially denounced a fellow citizen, another black man. Mm-hmm. And for that, people thought that he was a hero. But when Jackie began to talk about the same civil rights that Robeson had talked about, when Jackie really began to say, okay, you talk about me in this historic moment, but my own industry, Major League Baseball, still hasn't really integrated. In 1949, 4 years after Robinson was signed by Branch Rickey, there were only 7 black players in baseball.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
5
think
of them played for the Dodgers and the Indians.
Yeah, so, the Yankees didn't have any black players
until 1955, and so most of the sport didn't integrate. So you have Jackie saying, "Okay, you asked me to do this. You asked me that this was my civic duty, my responsibility. My own industry hasn't held up its own end." And then in 1954 and 55, when the civil rights movement starts to kick in, and you've got Brown versus Board of Education, you've got, the Emmett Till murder, you've got Rosa Parks. Now Jackie is becoming more and more and more vocal. And then the very same people who called him an American hero are turning on him. So part of the second half of this book is really about Jackie's disillusionment as well, which is, I did everything you asked me to do. And now you've turned on me for asking for basic equality.
Yeah, I don't think he came back to baseball until like the 1972 World Series, I believe.
That's right. And he never came back to baseball. He was never employed by baseball again. Mm-mm. He had essentially turned down all kinds of offers to come back for Old Timers Day from the Mets and even the Dodgers. And finally, he decided to because they were honoring Don Newcombe in 1972. He came back to one of the Old Timers Days with the Dodgers earlier that year. And then, of course, at the World Series, his last public appearance, that was celebrating, honoring 25 years after he had been, he had integrated the game. And during that time, his disillusionment grew. So what this book really sort of parallels is you have these two titanic figures who essentially were placed in opposition to each other by the federal government and ended up in the same place. And one of the things that happened with Robinson was, by 1968, 69, he's saying he doesn't even stand for the flag. He doesn't salute the flag. He doesn't sing the national anthem. He once gave an interview that said, which sounds very, very 2026, whenever I see if I see a bumper sticker with an American flag on it, I assume the driver is not my friend. And part of what he's talking about is the disillusionment of his life. Another part of it is the divisions during Vietnam, because that's what is going on at that time. And also just the fact that I think deep down, when he was signed by the Dodgers and then he makes his debut in April 1947, I think he really, really believed that this country was heading in direction, and he was helping it. And by the time he got to the end of the 60s, he no longer believed that. I mean, in 1963, in 63, he, right before the 64 election, he writes a column because he was a conservative, independent, but leaned Republican that, is the GOP for white men only. And for that, he was attacked by William F. Buckley and attacked by a lot of the right wing as well. And so he found himself in that second half of the 60s, sort of a man without a country and
Do
trying
you
to find
see?
the pathway was forward.
Do you see any people, like entertainers and athletes today, who speak out on social or political issues? I mean, like Robinson and Robeson did.
Well, I think that the period that just ended after the George Floyd, I think that 15-year period from the Miami Heat with the Trayvon Martin killing, going through Ferguson with Kaepernick to George Floyd. I think that period will be studied for some time, especially in terms of the speed and how quickly it all disappeared. I think that the athletes today are silent.
Yeah, and we had we in Richmond, where I'm based, we had the Confederate monuments which were taken down. But now you see people saying in
They want to put them back
government,
up.
put them back up. I'm like, no. I mean, they were taken down for a reason.
That's
Uh,
right.
Now, do you think America's actually changed, or how it treats, or has it changed in how it treats the outspoken African Americans?
Yeah, it's more hostile now than ever. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that when you look at what's happened, um, this country has shifted. Colin Kaepernick never worked again. He never got back in the NFL. I think that there's a lot more glossing over of it. I think there's a lot. I think the the marketing companies are much more savvy. You look at the back end of the end zone and it says it takes all of us. You
Hmm.
like the football game, all of us to do what? So
Yeah.
you're dancing along these lines here. Before Trump was elected, it said, the back of the end zone in football games said "end racism," and then
Yeah.
that disappeared. They took that one away. It was a little too controversial. And
Why would
so,
that be? Yeah. Why though? I
so
mean, why would
yeah,
it be controversial? It's
yeah.
like,
So I think that what you have here, and like I think one of the reasons why this book was so important to me, was because it really is just a continuum. You have these waves of activism. You have these figures who appear. You have these periods of dormancy, and then have them. You have them revive. And this was just a story about a slice of life that I think people had forgotten or never
yeah.
knew. Um, and the real price of that, when you think about what happened to someone like Paul Robeson, when I talk to African Americans, I talk to Black people, that they said, "Hey, what are you working on next?" And I mentioned this. Hey, who's Paul Robeson?
Yeah.
You never heard of him.
Yes.
And that to me is very important because that's not an accident. That's not just, oh, I'd never heard of him. I mean, there was an active campaign for a very long time to erase him from history. And I felt like it was really important to not have that happen. Harry Belafonte used to refer to Paul Robeson as one of our kings. I mean, this is one of the great Americans in the 20th century. This man was one of the greatest college football players of all time. He played in the NFL. He was
Hmm.
on Broadway. He was in the movies. He was a lawyer. He was Columbia Ivy League educated lawyer. There was nothing he couldn't do. And at one point, he was as famous as Jackie Robinson or Joe Louis or Mickey Mantle or anyone. And for his beliefs, for his political beliefs, which is supposedly what this country was based on, that you have the right to feel what you feel and express your opinions.
And that's
Everything
totally
was
true.
taken
Yeah.
away from him. Yeah.
The book is Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. Comes out, according to Amazon, on January 20th. So it's going to be available wherever books are sold. And I want to thank Howard Bryant, the author, for being here on Light Camera Author. Kings and Pawns is essential reading. You really, no matter who you are, you should get this because it's going to educate you and enlighten you. So, Howard, I really want to thank you for being on Light Camera Author today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thank you. And I feel bad because we never even got a chance to talk about Branch Rickey.
Yeah, Branch Rickey, I know it, but I mean, we can do another interview later on.
No, exactly. Once again, I think the one, if I can say something very quick about Rickey, I would just like to say that it was fascinating to me that the Branch Rickey integration story has really never been challenged. That he
Well,
had the floor for all these years, and I thought it was a lot of fun to sort of find out just what was the real story.
well, let's not end it yet. Let's talk about the real story real quick. I mean, I know the story about Branch Rickey used to say that when he was a coach, I believe at Ohio Wesleyan,
Wesleyan, yes.
and he was the coach, and he had an African American who was his catcher on the baseball team.
Charlie Thomas.
Yes, and the catcher was not allowed to stay in the same hotel as the rest of the white members of the team. And Rantricky said, "Look, he can stay with my room. Just go on up, and I'll settle this on up." But when he got up there, when the player was in tears, trying to grasp at his arms, rather, saying, "My skin
He
is
just cut
against
his
me."
own skin off.
Yeah, he
Said,
was trying to rip his skin off. Yeah.
if only I was not born with black skin, I could be like everyone else. Now,
Yes.
this is Branch Rickey's origin story, but what we know is that Branch Rickey had no real intention of integrating with black players. Now, it is absolutely true that Branch Rickey believed that everybody needed a chance to play and everyone deserved a chance to play. But his motive, his area of interest was Latin America. He was hoping that he could sign someone from Mexico or Venezuela or Cuba or the Dominican Republic, and that would integrate the game. And it would do two things. One, it would integrate the game, but the other thing it would do is that it would allow American segregation to remain intact. Branch Rickey had no interest in
Mhm.
challenging Jim Crow laws and all of those things and all of the different things that would have come with having an American black player be the person to integrate. And he spent $25,000 looking in scouring Latin America, only to discover that the best black players were in the Negro Leagues. And so,
Yeah.
and Rickey had no respect for the Negro Leagues. So to me, this piece of the story is really fascinating because this is really, in some ways, it's an unintended consequence. Um, Rickey got what he wanted, and it worked out for everybody. And I give him credit because he's the one who did it. He's the one who made it happen, and you have to respect what that was. But what I do find fascinating is I found that that piece of it was really interesting because if he had had his way, then the Negro Leagues would have remained separate for a very long time. Um, and then also in 1943, a few years before the signing, Paul Robeson addressed the major league owners to convince them to integrate. And
Wow.
I thought that was an interesting story for two reasons. And the biggest reason was those transcripts have never been available. And just they are now available in the Major League Baseball, I'm sorry, the Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum. So for the first time, you can actually hear what was said in that room. You actually get to see,
Really?
you can actually see what Kennesaw Mountain Landis and Clark Griffith and Tom Yawkey and Branch Rickey and all of these people, had to say about the about the Robeson and the delegation and about integration. In that meeting, which had never been made public until now, that was the first time when you read that transcript, you can see what Branch Rickey is up to. He's the only one in that meeting who challenges Landis because Kennesaw Mountain Landis, the commissioner, has no interest in integration. He has no interest in Robeson and in the discussion. But there's one guy who keeps going back to saying, "Hey, well, what about this integrate? What about having black players in the game?" And when you read it now, 100 years later, 80 years later, you realize what Branch Rickey was actually up to.
Wow. Well, and this is now we don't want to give away the whole book because because it's so interesting reading and stuff, but that is another one of the little tidbits in this book. I almost misread the title there. Kings and Pawns, Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson in America. Howard Bryant is the author. And Howard, I hope to have you back because I know you're going to be writing another book
Yeah,
pretty
call
soon.
anytime. Thank you so much for having me.
And until next time, if you like this episode, by the way, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who loves great storytelling. Until next time, keep reading, keep questioning, and remember every story has more than one angle.